Welcome back to the channel. These stories are meant for late nights, quiet rooms, and headphones on. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin the first story. I rented the house because I wanted quiet. Not silence exactly, just the kind of place where you could forget other people existed for a while. The listing described it as wooded residential, which sounded better than rural or remote. When I drove out to see it, that turned out to mean a narrow paved road cutting through dense trees, with houses tucked far enough back that you could miss them if you weren't paying attention. It was late January, right after a heavy snowstorm, the kind that turns everything muted and still, like the world has been wrapped in insulation. The driveway hadn't been plowed yet, and I had to park at the edge and walk the rest of the way, my boots crunching through untouched snow. The house itself looked exactly like the pictures. Single story, dark wood exterior, huge windows facing the tree line. Cozy in a way that felt intentional. It didn't look abandoned or run down, just quiet. Lived in by someone who liked being alone. That should have been my first warning. I moved in on a Friday afternoon. No neighbors came by, no cars passed while I unpacked. By the time the sun started to set, the woods behind the house were already swallowing the light. Inside, everything felt comfortable. A stone fireplace, vaulted ceiling, big open living room. The bedroom was at the far end of a short hallway, separated just enough to feel private. That room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a sliding glass door that opened onto a small wooden deck facing the forest. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it was unsettling. I tried not to think about that. The first night passed without anything obviously wrong. I cooked dinner, watched videos on my laptop, and fell asleep on the couch before midnight. I woke up around 1 in the morning and decided to just go to bed properly. That was when I heard the sound. A sharp crack, like wood snapping under pressure. Not a branch falling, not an animal rustling. It sounded deliberate, controlled. I froze in the hallway, listening. A few seconds passed. Then another crack, closer this time. I moved slowly into the bedroom and shut the door behind me, locking it out of habit more than fear. The lights were off, and once my eyes adjusted, I could see the trees clearly through the glass. Snow reflected what little moonlight there was, turning the forest into a flat, pale backdrop. I stared. Nothing moved. For a full minute, maybe longer, everything stayed still. My heart slowed. I told myself it was temperature shift, a tree settling, something normal. Then a shadow shifted between two trunks. Not crossing the clearing, just leaning in and out of view. I couldn't make out a shape, no features, just movement that didn't belong. I stepped back from the window and pulled the curtain closed, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. I checked the sliding door lock. It was secure. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. The next day felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Nothing happened, no noises, no movement, but the feeling stayed. That sense that something was just slightly out of alignment, like the house wasn't empty when it should be. Every time I turned my back to a window, I felt exposed. I kept catching myself glancing at reflections in the glass, expecting to see someone standing behind me. I didn't. By evening, another light snowfall began. That actually made me feel better. Anyone wandering around in this weather would leave tracks. The idea of someone lurking unseen felt less likely with fresh snow on the ground. I lit the fireplace, wrapped myself in a blanket, and watched TV until around 10. That was when I noticed the den light was off. It was a small room near the front of the house, bookshelves, a chair, nothing else. I always left that light on. It made the house feel less cavernous at night. I stood up and walked down the hall. The switch was flipped down. I turned it back on, annoyed with myself for feeling uneasy over something so small. Maybe I'd turned it off earlier without thinking. That happens. I grabbed a drink from the kitchen and went back to the couch. Less than a minute later, I glanced down the hallway. The light was off again. This time, my stomach dropped. I stood slowly, staring at the dark doorway. I didn't move closer, I didn't call out, I just looked at the switch from where I stood. It was physically flipped down. Someone had been there. My phone was charging in the bedroom, my keys were by the front door. I realized I'd have to move through the house to get both, and that thought alone made my chest tighten. I went toward the bedroom first, keeping my steps quiet. I didn't turn any lights on. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw footprints outside the window, fresh, deep, leading from the trees straight towards the glass. And standing just beyond them was a man. He was tall, broad shoulders, completely dark against the forest behind him. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew he was looking directly at me. I didn't scream. I ran. I bolted back into the hallway, grabbed my keys from the table, and heard movement on the other side of the house. Fast, heavy. Not one person, more than one. I flung the front door open and sprinted through the snow towards my car. As I fumbled with the door handle, I saw the man from the window rounding the side of the house, moving fast, arms pumping. I got inside and slammed the door shut just as he reached the driveway. I didn't look back as I drove. I stayed on the road until I reached the nearest town and called the police from a gas station. When officers arrived at the house nearly half an hour later, they found destruction. Windows shattered from the outside, furniture overturned, cabinet doors ripped open, deep gouges in the walls. Not the work of one person searching for valuables. It looked like rage, like they had expected me to still be there. I never spent another night in that house. I told myself I was done with it. That night at the gas station, wrapped in fluorescent light and the smell of burnt coffee, I felt safe for the first time since I'd driven out of that driveway. The police officer kept saying the same thing. I did the right thing. I left when I needed to. There was no sign of forced entry before I ran, no indication anyone had been inside earlier. He said it like that should have comforted me. Instead, it made things worse. Because if no one had broken in before I noticed, then that meant they had been waiting, watching, close enough to move the moment they realized I was alone. I didn't go back to the house that night, or the next. I stayed at a motel on the edge of town and barely slept, waking up every time headlights swept across the parking lot. On the third morning, my phone buzzed with a call from the county sheriff's office. They wanted me to come in. The deputy who met me was polite, careful with his words. He slid a few printed photos across the table, grainy images taken from outside the house in daylight. Footprints, tire marks, dragged impressions in the snow that hadn't been obvious in the dark. There were at least 3 individuals, he said, possibly 4. My stomach tightened. They weren't improvising, he continued. They knew the layout. They moved with purpose. Whoever they were, they'd been there before. I asked the question I had been avoiding since the first night. How long? He hesitated. Hard to say, but judging by the packed snow near the rear windows and the wear patterns on the deck, it wasn't recent. Weeks, maybe months. The idea of that house being observed long before I ever set foot in it made my skin crawl. The lights, the windows, the routine I didn't even realize I'd fallen into during those first 2 days. I asked if they had any leads. They didn't. No cameras in the area, no nearby residents close enough to notice anything. The house sat in a blind spot created by trees and terrain. Whoever chose it knew that. I signed the paperwork to officially terminate the lease that afternoon. The landlord didn't argue. He didn't even ask why. He refunded my deposit without hesitation. That should have been the end. It wasn't. 2 nights later, I woke up in the motel room with the same feeling I'd had in the cabin, that sense of being watched, even with the curtains drawn and the deadbolt locked. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was just leftover fear, adrenaline that hadn't burned off yet, trauma trying to invent danger where there was none. Then my phone vibrated on the nightstand. No notification sound, just the vibration. A text message from an unknown number. It was a photo. The house, taken at night. My old bedroom window was lit. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. I knew instantly when it had been taken. That wasn't an old photo. That was the same angle I remembered from inside, the same reflection on the glass. Another message came in before I could think. You left the light on. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I called the sheriff's office immediately. The dispatcher kept me talking while deputies were sent out to the property again. I stayed awake the rest of the night with every light on, my back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door. By morning, the deputies called back. They'd found fresh footprints, not just around the house, inside it. The front door had been unlocked, no signs of forced entry. The lights inside were on exactly as shown in the photo. On the kitchen table, they found something else, my spare key, the one I didn't remember being given. The landlord swore he'd handed over only one set. The deputy believed him. The locks hadn't been changed in years. Whoever had that key didn't need to break in. They'd always had access. I expected fear. What I felt instead was something colder, a realization. This wasn't random, it wasn't opportunistic. I hadn't been chosen because I was careless or unlucky. I'd been selected. The house wasn't the target. I was. The sheriff recommended I leave the area entirely, not temporarily, permanently. He didn't say it out loud, but his tone made it clear. They couldn't protect me, not from people who are willing to wait, to watch, to follow. I drove for hours that day, changed towns, changed hotels, paid in cash, turned my phone off for long stretches. For a while, it worked. Weeks passed, then months. The edge dulled, the constant tension faded into something manageable. I found a small apartment in a busy city where sirens and voices bled through the walls at all hours. I welcomed the noise. It meant people were close. I started sleeping again. Then, one evening, as I unlocked my apartment door, I noticed something on the floor. A piece of wood. Dark, weathered. A splinter from a deck railing. I didn't touch it. I stood there for a long time, keys still in my hand, heart pounding, staring at that small, deliberate message. They hadn't rushed me. They hadn't forced anything. They'd found me. Again. I moved the next morning. No explanation, no forwarding address. I cut contact with anyone who knew where I was going. I changed my number, closed accounts, became smaller, quieter. I don't live in isolated places anymore. I avoid ground floors. I keep my routines inconsistent. I check locks twice, sometimes 3 times. And still, sometimes late at night, I'll notice a light turned off that I don't remember touching, or a sound outside my window that doesn't quite fit. I don't call the police anymore. I just listen, because I know now that some people don't break in. They wait, they watch, and they're very patient. The voicemail came in at 2:17 a.m. I didn't hear it at first. My phone was face down on the kitchen counter, vibrating softly against the laminate. I was standing at the sink, staring out into the dark backyard, trying to remember why I'd walked into the kitchen in the first place. It wasn't until the vibrations stopped that I realized how quiet the house had become. No refrigerator hum, no distant traffic, no wind in the trees, just silence. I picked up the phone and saw the missed call notification. Unknown number, no caller ID, one new voicemail. I almost deleted it without listening. I get spam calls all the time. Everyone does. But something about the timing bothered me. The way it had come in during that moment of stillness, as if the house itself had paused to make room for it. I hit play. At first, there was only breathing. Slow, controlled, close to the microphone. I held the phone away from my ear, my skin prickling. Then a voice spoke. "You forgot to lock the back door." The message ended. I stood there for a long time, phone still pressed against my palm, my eyes fixed on the sliding glass door at the back of the kitchen. The lock was turned. I checked it anyway. I always did. I pulled on the handle until it rattled in its frame, locked, solid. I told myself it was a prank, someone fishing for reactions. Maybe they'd guessed, maybe they'd said the most common thing people forget at night. Still, I walked through the house and checked every door, every window, the garage, the basement entry, all locked. When I went back to the kitchen, I noticed something I hadn't before. The light above the sink was on. I don't remember turning it on. I slept badly that night. Every creak of the house felt louder than it should have. I dreamed of someone standing just outside the range of the porch light, close enough that I could feel them there, but never close enough to see their face. In the morning, I laughed it off. Daylight has a way of shrinking things, making them feel manageable, embarrassing even. I made coffee, I checked the news, I deleted the voicemail. Then I found the footprints. They were faint, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. A partial impression in the damp soil beneath the kitchen window, pressed just deep enough to show the outline of a shoe, facing the house. I crouched down, heart pounding, and followed the marks with my eyes. They led along the side of the house, past the back door, and disappeared where the ground turned to gravel. No other prints, just the one set. I told myself it could have been anyone, a delivery driver, a neighbor cutting through the yard, a coincidence stacked on top of an overactive imagination. Still, I called in sick to work. That afternoon, I installed new locks, deadbolts, motion lights. I even bought a cheap camera system online, the kind that promises peace of mind in a slim cardboard box. I mounted one camera over the back door and another facing the driveway. When I tested them, everything looked normal, boring even. That night, I slept with the phone on the bedside table and the bedroom door locked. The next voicemail came just after midnight. I didn't wait this time. I listened to it immediately. The same breathing. Then the voice. "You added new locks. That's smart." My stomach dropped. I sat up in bed, scanning the dark corners of the room, the hallway beyond the door. I checked the camera feeds on my phone. The driveway was empty. The backyard was still. The message continued. "You missed one window." I didn't sleep after that. At sunrise, I walked the perimeter of the house again. Every window was shut, every latch secure, except one. The small basement window near the back, the one half hidden behind a bush I never paid much attention to. The latch was closed, but the screen had been removed. It was placed neatly against the foundation, placed there with care. That's when I called the police. They arrived quickly, 2 officers, calm, professional. They listened, took notes, examined the window. They found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no damage. One of them suggested it might be someone trying to scare me, a neighbor with a grudge, a prank taken too far. They recommended I keep the doors locked and call if anything else happened. As they drove away, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I hadn't told them about the camera system, and yet, when I checked the footage later, there was a gap. 3 hours missing from the previous night. The timestamps jumped forward without explanation, no error message, no corrupted file warning, just absence. That evening, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching the camera feeds cycle on the TV. The house felt different now, smaller, like it was holding its breath. At 9:43 p.m., the back camera flickered, just for a second. When it stabilized, there was something new in the frame. A man standing at the edge of the yard. He was far enough away that the details blurred. Tall, still, facing the house. He didn't move even as the motion light came on and washed him in harsh white. He raised one hand and waved. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. By the time I looked back at the screen, he was gone.
The officers arrived within minutes. They searched the yard, the surrounding area, the street beyond. They found nothing. But when one of them walked back towards the house, he stopped near the kitchen window. "There's something here," he said. Pressed into the dirt, just below the glass, was a fresh footprint, facing inward. That night, as I sat alone after they left, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away. I already knew what it would say, because the back door handle was moving. Slowly, carefully, testing. The handle rattled again, and I froze. My heart was hammering in my chest as if it wanted to escape my ribcage. I didn't move. I just stared at the back door through the kitchen window, watching the metal turn slowly in response to the invisible force outside. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel him there. I knew it. Every instinct screamed at me that someone had been watching me for days, maybe weeks, and that he'd been patient enough to learn the rhythms of my life. I grabbed my phone with one hand and dialed 911, my thumb shaking so badly I almost couldn't press the call button. The dispatcher answered immediately. I whispered my address and tried to explain the situation without making it sound hysterical. While I spoke, the handle stopped moving, then shifted again slightly. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't running. They were waiting, calculating, enjoying the fear that pulsed through me. I pressed myself against the counter, eyes locked on the door, and waited. Minutes passed. Each second felt like an hour. Then I saw him, the shadow of a man crossing the yard, careful, slow, staying just out of the range of the lights. I couldn't make out details, just the outline, tall and broad-shouldered. The officers arrived quickly this time, lights flashing, tires crunching in the gravel, voices calling out. I ran to the front door, flinging it open, and shouted toward the yard. My heart was racing so fast I thought it would explode. The men split up, moving cautiously toward the back. I stayed by the door, gripping my phone like a lifeline, watching the officers sweep past the garage and toward the backyard fence. They found nothing. No footprints in the snow, no tracks in the damp grass, no signs that anyone had been near the house. And yet, I knew he had been there. I had seen the shadow. I had felt the deliberate pressure of his presence. The officers advised me to stay somewhere safe for the night, and I agreed. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house, leaving the camera system running on remote feed. I watched from my phone as the night crawled on. Nothing happened. No movement in the yard, no sound from the house, just the usual creaks and groans of an empty building settling. I told myself that maybe it was over, that he had been scared off, or maybe he had chosen a different target. I tried to sleep at my friend's place, but every little noise, the car horn outside, the wind rattling the windows, even the sound of my own breathing made me jump. My dreams were haunted by the shadow at the back door, staring silently, waiting for me to slip. The following day, I returned to the house with the officers. They searched methodically, inside and out, checking closets, basements, and every dark corner. They found nothing, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I stayed in the house under their supervision, and for a few days nothing happened. The cameras showed only the empty yard, the driveway, the same familiar trees, but I knew that someone had been inside. Someone who had learned the layout, the timing of when I left for work, the quiet moments I spent alone. I didn't need proof. I had experienced it. I had felt him. I eventually decided I couldn't stay there. I sold the house quietly, moved into a smaller apartment in a more populated area, and changed my routine entirely. No more late nights alone, no more leaving doors or windows unlocked. I even changed the route I took to work and avoided the streets near my old home. I told myself it was over, that he was a shadow in the night, and that sometimes people just scare others for reasons that are unfathomable. But I never forgot the way his presence had weighed on me, or the voicemail that had begun it all. Months later, I received a package at my new apartment. No return address, just a small black box with a single slip of paper inside. On it were the words, "You forgot one light." My stomach sank. I never called the police this time. I didn't report it. I just threw the paper away and double-checked every light in the apartment, locked the doors, closed the windows. But I knew it was pointless. Whoever it had been, he had not needed a reason to find me again. He had only needed patience, and I had no way to know if I would ever escape it completely. Even now, years later, I still check over my shoulder. Even now, the sound of a handle turning, the creak of a floorboard, or the faint flicker of a light sets my heart racing. Piper, my dog, senses it too. Her ears perk up, she growls quietly at the empty hallway. She knows before I do, and that terrifies me more than anything. The shadow man, the intruder who had been patient and deliberate, has never been caught. He became a ghost in my life, and I have learned to live in constant awareness. I don't go anywhere alone for long. I don't leave doors unlocked. I sleep with the lights on, and even then, I never sleep soundly. Sometimes when I see the shadow of a man from the corner of my eye, I freeze. I don't move. I tell myself it's imagination, but deep down, I know it isn't. He could be anywhere, waiting patiently as before. The experience left me with more than fear. It left me with the knowledge that someone could watch, follow, and invade your life without you ever knowing it. And the worst part, there's no ending, no confrontation, no closure, just the certainty that he is out there and that for one moment, one slip, he could return. I keep my lights on at night. I check the locks, I never answer unknown calls, and I make sure Piper is always close. She's the only reassurance I have in a world where a single voicemail changed everything, where a shadow in the yard could haunt my dreams forever, and where one man's patience made my life something I could never forget.
I was driving late that night, heading home after a long week of work, taking the familiar stretch of Highway 47 that cut through the outskirts of town. It was mostly deserted this time of night, the fluorescent lights of the few rest stops along the route flickering weakly against the dark sky. I had stopped at a small diner earlier, but it had been packed with people leaving for weekend trips, and I decided to push through instead of lingering. The road was empty now, save for the occasional semi-truck rumbling past, and the headlights reflected off the wet asphalt from a brief rain shower that had passed hours before. By the time I reached the first rest area past the old bridge, I was tired. My eyes burned from staring at the road for hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. The sign indicated bathrooms, gas, and a small convenience store. I figured I'd pull over for a quick stretch and grab a cup of coffee before finishing the last 40 miles home. The lot was nearly empty, with only a single truck parked on the far end, its engine off. I parked next to one of the lone streetlights, grabbed my jacket, and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and biting, and I pulled my collar up as I walked toward the store. Inside, the fluorescent lighting was harsh, buzzing overhead. The cashier nodded at me, tired but polite, and I wandered down the narrow aisles, picking up a bottled coffee and a granola bar. As I walked toward the register, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye near the glass doors. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow shifting in the parking lot. But when I glanced directly, I saw a figure standing just beyond the glow of the streetlight. A man, tall and broad, hands shoved into the pockets of a dark jacket, just staring at the doors. He didn't approach, didn't move, just watched. I turned back to the counter, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Maybe he was waiting for someone else. Maybe I was just tired and jumpy. When I stepped back outside, the man was closer. Not right at the doors, but moving toward my car. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. He didn't say anything, just kept walking steadily, almost casually toward the lot. I considered getting back in the car and leaving immediately, but the convenience store doors were between us, and I figured that might delay him. I slid my keys into my pocket and headed for my car, trying to look confident, hoping he wasn't paying attention. My hands were shaking as I opened the driver's side door and dropped into the seat. The man stopped for a moment near the truck, then kept walking slowly toward me, and I finally recognized that he wasn't just a random passerby. I locked the doors and started the engine, pretending to check my mirrors and adjust the seat. My pulse raced with every second, every tick of the clock stretching impossibly long. The man circled the truck slowly, his movements deliberate, like he was surveying the scene, waiting for me to make a mistake.
I could feel his eyes on me, burning through the windshield, and I had this sudden, visceral sense of danger. Something told me he had done this before. He had waited for drivers, late at night, alone, and he had a plan. I couldn't explain it, but every instinct screamed at me to leave now. I eased out of the parking lot and onto the highway, keeping my speed moderate so I didn't draw attention. Behind me, I could see the man jogging slightly, keeping pace with the car, now illuminated by my taillights. My stomach dropped. He wasn't running to catch me in a panic. He was running to maintain control, to ensure I didn't escape too quickly. I considered pulling over and calling the police, but there was no signal here, just empty road and dead zones. I had to think fast. I accelerated, weaving through the sparse traffic, trying to put distance between us, but he kept pace. I could feel the tension thick in the air, like it was pressing down on me from every angle. I remembered the next rest stop a few miles ahead. It was a larger one, with cameras, more lights, and usually a few trucks parked. Maybe I could lose him there, or at least have witnesses. I gripped the wheel tighter, eyes scanning every shadow along the roadside. The man remained there, pacing with uncanny precision, as if he knew exactly how fast I could safely drive without drawing attention. My mind raced through every worst-case scenario. What if he caught up? What if he had a weapon? The thought of pulling over anywhere alone terrified me, but the only alternative was to keep driving blindly into the night with him following me. The rest stop finally appeared, lights glowing against the dark horizon like a beacon of safety. I took the exit sharply, heart in my throat, and swung into the lot. I parked quickly near a bank of lights and jumped out, holding the coffee tightly as I scanned the area. The man was still behind me, stopping at the edge of the lot. He didn't approach directly, just paused, watching. I stayed in the car for a second, thinking about what to do, then decided to walk toward the convenience store attached to the gas pumps. At least there would be people inside, someone who could intervene if he tried anything. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh, the hum of refrigerators filling the air. A few truckers were inside, buying snacks or stretching their legs, and I felt a slight sense of relief. The man didn't follow. He stayed outside, lurking near the edge of the parking lot, his presence still palpable but constrained. I could see him through the glass doors, watching intently, and I realized he had been planning this the whole time. He wasn't just a random stranger. He had been studying patterns, waiting for a driver who was vulnerable, alone, and isolated. Minutes felt like hours as I lingered inside, buying a bottle of water and pretending to browse the shelves. The man moved occasionally, pacing behind the trucks, never stepping into the light, never revealing more than his shadow. I couldn't shake the image of him standing by my car earlier, patient and silent. I thought of all the drivers who had passed through this area before, unaware, and I realized he'd probably done this many times, watching, choosing, waiting for the perfect moment. My stomach churned with a mixture of fear and anger, fear for my safety, anger that someone could be so calculating, so predatory. Finally, I stepped outside, careful not to draw attention. The man was gone. I didn't know if he had disappeared into the woods bordering the lot or if he had simply retreated to wait another day, but the immediate threat had vanished. I walked quickly to my car, glancing over my shoulder the entire way. The lights on the lot provided a false sense of security. I knew he could be anywhere, hidden, waiting for me to let my guard down. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat for a long moment, letting my hands unclench from the wheel. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened and why I had survived without confrontation. I finally started the car and slowly pulled back onto the highway, keeping my speed moderate and my headlights sweeping over the dark tree line. The night felt heavier than usual, each shadow deeper, each rustle of leaves sounding like footsteps in the distance. I kept scanning the rearview mirror, half expecting him to appear out of nowhere, but the road behind me remained empty. Still, the image of his tall silhouette standing in the glow of the streetlight earlier refused to leave my mind. I felt a lingering sense of vulnerability I had never experienced before. By the time I reached the edge of town, the tension had eased slightly, but not entirely. The predator, whatever he was, had been patient, calculating, and silent, and that thought stuck with me. I told myself I had gotten lucky, that he must have moved on to another target, but deep down, I knew the encounter wasn't random. Someone like that didn't give up easily. Someone like that kept track. I parked my car in my driveway and stepped inside, locking every door and double-checking the windows. The warmth of my home offered comfort, but not peace. The highway, the rest stops, the shadows, they were all still out there, waiting, watching, and I couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning.
After that night at the rest stop, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even at home, the streets outside my apartment felt darker and emptier than usual. Every time a car passed, I flinched, half expecting him to appear out of the shadows. Sleep became difficult. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that tall figure, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, silently pacing along the highway, waiting for his next target. I tried rationalizing it, telling myself that I had escaped and he had probably moved on, but the fear stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. A few days later, I found myself driving back along Highway 47 for work, unable to resist the pull of the route. It had become routine for me over the years, but now it carried a new tension. I made sure to avoid the rest stops I had passed before, sticking to areas that were well lit and populated. I kept the radio on at high volume and constantly scanned my mirrors. Hours into the drive, my nerves were taut, and every shadow along the tree line seemed to twitch with movement. The isolation of the highway, combined with the memory of the man's unwavering gaze, made my imagination run wild. I couldn't get it out of my head. What if he had been watching me for weeks before I even noticed him? As I approached a particularly dark stretch of road, I noticed a vehicle pulled over ahead. At first, I thought it was a truck like the one at the rest stop, parked for a short break. But as I got closer, I saw movement. A figure was standing next to it, looking toward the tree line. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up instantly. My pulse raced and my stomach twisted. The posture, the deliberate stance, it was the same way he had been that night. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white, and accelerated slightly, keeping my headlights pointed toward the figure to maintain visibility. The shadow didn't flinch or retreat. It simply remained, watching, waiting, measuring. I tried rationalizing it again. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was another driver, stretching, checking the woods, whatever. But instinctively, I knew better. There was something deliberate in the way he held himself, a confidence that belonged to someone accustomed to observation, to choosing his moment. I stayed focused on the road, avoiding eye contact with the figure in my mirrors, trying to keep my heart steady. Then, as I passed, I caught a glimpse of the face, sharp features obscured by shadow, eyes dark and fixed. I swallowed hard and forced my foot down on the accelerator. I wasn't just driving anymore, I was fleeing. The next few miles passed in a blur. Every passing truck, every glimmer of headlights in the distance seems to heighten my paranoia. I kept checking my rearview mirror, but he wasn't there, at least not yet. I had this creeping realization that he wasn't going to chase me openly. He would wait for the perfect moment, the place where isolation was absolute, and then he would act. My mind raced through every possible escape route, every scenario. If I stopped at a rest area, he might be there. If I pulled off to a gas station, he could appear on the other side. There was no safe place along this stretch of road. By the time I reached the next exit, I was practically shaking. I decided to take it, even though it added a good 20 minutes to my drive home. I pulled onto a side road leading into a small town, hoping the lights and traffic would discourage anyone from following. My pulse didn't slow though, and my senses remained on high alert. That's when I noticed something in my mirrors. A vehicle had appeared behind me, not moving erratically, not speeding, just keeping pace, perfectly in line. My stomach dropped. I was being followed. I tried changing lanes, taking a few turns, anything to test whether it was coincidence or intentional. Every time, the vehicle mirrored my movements. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Whoever it was, they knew exactly what they were doing. I realized then that I couldn't outrun this person in the traditional sense. I had to outsmart him. I made a quick decision to pull into a lit gas station a few blocks ahead. The area was small, but had a 24-hour convenience store and a security camera at every corner. I parked near the pumps under the strongest light I could find and stepped out, keeping my keys ready in my hand. The following minutes were terrifying. I watched as the vehicle slowed slightly but didn't stop.
The man inside didn't emerge. I went into the store and immediately found the clerk, an older man behind the counter who barely looked up from his paper. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained my situation. He didn't seem alarmed at first, but then I noticed the man in the vehicle from the window, a shadow shifting against the dark interior. The clerk nodded towards the camera monitors on the wall. "You want me to call the cops?" he asked. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, please." I stayed inside, heart hammering while the call was made. The man in the vehicle didn't linger though. After several tense minutes, he drove slowly past the gas station, keeping to the far side of the lot, then disappeared down the side road, back into darkness. I exhaled, but the relief was thin. I'd only delayed him. The knowledge that he was still out there, somewhere along the highway, somewhere in the shadows, stayed with me. The police arrived minutes later, taking my statement, reviewing the security footage. They confirmed what I had suspected. The man had circled the area, pacing with a purpose, but they couldn't identify him. The footage showed a tall figure, hood up, face obscured. Just as I feared, he was a ghost among the shadows. The next day, I didn't drive. I called in for remote work, avoiding the highway entirely. My phone never stopped buzzing with thoughts and imagined scenarios. I replayed every mile I had driven, every glance in the mirrors, every shadow along the tree line. I couldn't stop thinking about the rest stop, the lot, the convenience store. He was methodical. He studied drivers. He learned their habits. He was patient enough to wait for weeks or even months until he found the right person, and I had unknowingly fit the criteria. The following weekend, I convinced a friend, Jared, to come along for a drive. The idea was to travel together, keep each other alert, and maybe ease my paranoia. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to explain why I was nervous about the route. As we drove, I kept my eyes scanning every shadow, every vehicle along the roadside. Everything was normal until we approached the rest stop near the old bridge, the same one from before. I slowed slightly, trying to stay calm, when I noticed movement near the edge of the lot. I stiffened. It was him. Same figure, same posture, just barely visible against the darkness. My stomach dropped. I slowed further and he seemed to notice us, tilting his head slightly as if measuring. My hands trembled on the wheel. Jared looked at me, confusion and concern etched on his face. I forced myself to speak, voice tight. "Don't stop, just keep driving." He nodded, glancing out the window. The figure didn't approach the road, didn't wave or signal. He simply remained, watching, waiting, measuring. My mind reeled with questions I didn't want to ask. Why me? How long had he been doing this? Was he always patient, or had something triggered him to follow me that night? We passed the rest stop without incident, adrenaline still surging through me, but the encounter left a mark. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided that night that I wouldn't drive that highway alone again, at least not with precaution. I started leaving late at night with friends, keeping to well-lit routes and avoiding isolated areas altogether. But even with precautions, the fear never left. Every shadow along a deserted road, every unexpected movement, every lone figure standing by a car, those memories haunted me. Weeks later, I heard reports of a man matching the same description spotted along other stretches of highway, always near rest stops, always late at night. No crimes had been reported yet, but the pattern was unmistakable. Whoever he was patient and calculated, and he hadn't been caught. I realized then that I had narrowly escaped something far worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just random fear or paranoia, it was real. He was still out there, waiting for someone else, and there was nothing I or anyone else could do to stop him. Even now, years later, I avoid that stretch of highway entirely. I tell friends to drive in groups if they must, to always park under lights, and to stay alert. The memory of that night, of the shadowed figure pacing in the rest stop lot, of his patient, deliberate stalking, never fades. It serves as a constant reminder. There are people out there who watch, who wait, who plan, and sometimes the luck of being alone can make you a target. I know now that he's still out there somewhere, stalking another lonely driver, another tired traveler, and for all I know, I was just lucky enough to survive his first attempt.